Are you a startup that is contemplating hiring an internal recruiter versus an agency recruiter? Well, I'm going to walk you through the pros and the cons of agency recruiters and internal recruiters in this video. I'm Brooke Dunwell, founder of Carbon3 Recruiting. So if you're a smaller company, you typically can't sustain hiring a full-time internal recruiter unless you have a ton of hires to make and it's a consistent hiring plan and a hiring strategy for several months or years. Most of the time, to make it cost effective, you need to be a larger company and have a larger need of hiring. Startups typically don't have consistent hiring. They typically fluctuate over time. So that's when it may be better to go with an agency recruiter, but we're going to talk about the pros and the cons. So the pros of an internal recruiter: they have access to employee referrals. They have access to inside information. They have access to internal hiring managers. They know what's going on with the company. They have a good feel for the culture. They can communicate the culture and what's going on within the company, where they're headed, what obstacles they faced, etc., etc. They cost less than an agency recruiter typically, but that's dependent, and we'll get to that in a minute. They also can decrease the onboarding time for new hires. So because they're there, they can help offset the time and the money spent on onboarding employees and kind of mend that bridge. The cons of hiring an internal recruiter: one is you have the salary, you have benefits, you have unemployment if you have to lay them off, obviously, but definitely consistent salary and benefits. You also, in addition, have to pay for job boards and job postings and advertising. If they want access to other resources and databases, you will have to pay for those too, so that's an additional cost involved. So when I mentioned earlier, you have the salary and they're usually more cost effective than agencies. Not necessarily when you start adding up all of the databases and the resources and the advertising and everything that goes into it, it may not be more cost effective or cheaper to hire an internal recruiter, especially if you don't have enough hiring needs to sustain them for a whole year plus, right? They could potentially cause culture stagnation, but not always, but could potentially. They rely heavily on the applicants, so they have a limited pool of candidates. And then let's jump over to the pros and the cons of agency recruiters. So agency recruiters typically have access to more candidates. They definitely can pursue competitors more so than internal recruiters. They work very hard at getting passive candidates, not just job seekers that are applying to jobs. So you will definitely get more access to passive candidates than an internal recruiter will. Candidates, job seekers typically tell agency recruiters a lot more information. For example, I've had many people tell me over time that I will tell you this, but I wouldn't tell them this, right? So they give recruiters, agency recruiters, a lot more insight into personal information, company information. That leads me to agency recruiters have the ability to get a lot of industry insight and marketplace insight, and they get the word on the street. They get all the good, the bad, the ugly. They know who's moving, where they're going, what's going on within competitors, and the structure changes and the culture changes and comp and commission and why people would move and why they wouldn't. And they also keep in touch with their candidates. They build a vast network over years, and they stay in communication with those candidates and constantly in touch with them. So they follow them wherever they go, they follow their career, and they have a much better feel or hand on what's going on when it comes to potential candidates, because they not only work with your company, but they work with other companies. So they build and work very hard at building relationships with candidates. They also have more resources. They typically have several databases. You don't have the charge or the cost of job postings and job boards, and then you don't have to incur the cost of those additional databases and those additional resources. They also get a ton of referrals and industry referrals. They rely heavily on industry referrals. They also work with other recruiters and partner with other recruiters. So they have a much larger network to be able to utilize and leverage when it comes to filling your positions. And you can engage with them when needed. So you don't have an overhead salary to pay, and you may not have any work for them. If you have 5 hires, if you have 20 hires, you can work with them. And then the next quarter, if you don't have any hires, you don't have to work with them. You can also get really creative when it comes to fee structures, depending on the firm that you're working with. But there are several that will be creative and can create a specific fee structure that's based on your needs, that can work and be cost efficient and effective for you. So the only con that could potentially would be the cost. Agency recruiters typically are a bit more pricey than an internal recruiter if you have enough hiring to sustain. But even if you get larger, and larger companies have an internal recruiting team, they tend to work with external agency recruiters too, because they need more access to more candidates. So those are the differences between the agency and internal recruiters, the pros and the cons. If you want to learn more about recruiting or hiring for startups, subscribe to our channel, make sure and like this video, and you can always connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. Until next time, have a fantastic day.